Greetings, everybody. It is my pleasure to be here today and to share my views on this very important topic of social development, the mining industry, and our achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Let me start by thanking Ms. Angela Grossheim and the rest of the PERUMIN team for the opportunity to share these remarks. And I'm sorry I can't be in country in person, but of course, these are the times we live in. My name is Rohitesh Dhawan, and I am the CEO of the International Council on Mining and Metals. The members of this group, the ICMM, account for about 1/3 of the global mining and metals industry. And we are very proud to have amongst our membership both companies and associations with significant connections and operations in Peru. And our role as the ICMM is to drive collective action on behalf of the global mining and metals industry to enhance the contribution of the sector to sustainable development. So the topic at hand today, which is how can this industry partner effectively with governments to achieve the sustainable development goals, is very close to my heart, both personally and professionally. This is the decade of action towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Between 2020 and 2030, there is a global movement to achieve the goals that governments signed up to in 2015 that would see us by 2030 making sure that nobody goes to bed hungry, that we eliminate poverty altogether, that there's clean water and sanitation for everybody, decent work for all, a sustainable planet, and other goals that we would all subscribe to as comprising a sustainable planet and society. Now, what I want to share with you today is a story of two halves, maybe a game of two halves, perhaps, if we think about a football analogy. And this comes from whenever somebody tells me they have a story to tell me, I always ask, is there good news or is there bad news? And if it's both, I always ask for the bad news first. So I'm going to do the same. I'm going to share with you where I think we are in the achievement of these Sustainable Development Goals, starting with the bad news and then the good news after that. So the bad news is that the result of the pandemic over the last 18 months has meant that we are now collectively, as a planet, in danger of meeting those 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Just taking one indicator around poverty, by some estimates, nearly 300 million people will be pushed into poverty as a result of the pandemic. And that comes off the back of many years of progress where we saw millions come out of poverty on a regular basis. And today, as we stand in 2021, if nothing changes, we will be missing the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. Now, amongst the goals, and there are 17 of them, of course, we may be doing better on some, worse on others. But overall, to create a sustainable society and planet, we need to achieve each of the 17 goals. And the bad news of my story is that coming out of the pandemic, we are in a worse position on several of those goals than what we were going in. So that's the bad news, but I promised you good news. And the good news is that we have the solutions available to close that gap very, very quickly. And if we just focus in on the solutions available through the role that the mining sector can play and how governments and the industry can work together, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. Now, why I can say that is because just very recently, we have finished an original piece of research that clearly documents the positive impact that the mining industry can have together with governments in improving the lives of people around the world. So I'm pleased to say that we have found over a study looking back 25 years into history that countries that have a significant mining sector have shown the ability to develop on several social economic indicators quicker than countries where the mining sector is not such a big part of the economy. Now, you might be surprised to hear that, or maybe not. But those that are surprised to hear that, remember that for many years we have been saying that the discovery of natural resources, whether that was minerals or oil and gas, tended to create problems in countries. The resource curse, as it was called before. But what our research is showing us is that subject to certain conditions being in place, and that's really important, I will come back to that, the mining industry can be a powerful force for social and economic development. So let me tell you what that looks like in practice, and I'll come back to what those conditions are. So in practice, what we have found is that when you consider the number of countries that are dependent on mining as a big part of their economy, they have closed the gap with non-mining and non-resource dependent countries faster than they would have if they didn't have those mining sectors as a core part of the economy. And it goes further than that. Within the country, in regions where mining takes place, those regions tend to do better than regions where mining doesn't occur. Now, I can say that because the information that we've used to compile this looks across 12 of the Sustainable Development Goals, across several indicators spanning those 12 SDGs, and it compares it to countries and the quality of governance in those countries. Now, when I say governance, of course, what I mean is the set of rules and regulations, not only for the mining sector, but for the country as a whole, and how consistently they're applied. And what we find is that countries that have high scores of governance tend to achieve better socioeconomic progress than countries that have scores on governance. And what goes further is that when a country is well governed in its entirety, that has a bigger influence than when its mining sector is well governed, but the country as a whole has weaknesses in governance. So when I said that subject to certain conditions, the mining industry can be a powerful force for social and economic development, that is what I meant. That if working together, the industry and governments come together to raise the standards of the management of resources, the people of that country benefit from mining operations, and we can achieve social progress. Now, you might be wondering, what does that look like in practice? Which countries have demonstrated this, and which countries show the challenges with achieving this level of governance and social development? And if we look back 25 years, there are a set of economies that, relative to all others, have done better because of the quality of governance. Peru is one of those countries. The others are Bolivia, Indonesia, Botswana. These are countries that over the last 25 years, the data shows us, have made significant gains in social and economic development and have used the mining and metals industry as a driver of that socioeconomic development. So what have these countries done that others haven't? And what are the lessons perhaps that we can all take? Well, there are two important lessons. One is that countries have prioritized overall governance and improvements in overall governance in order to drive change, not just in the mining sector, but for economies as a whole. Botswana is probably the best example of that. Many of you will be familiar that the Botswana government has been committed to a process of governance, improvement, stability, and reform over several decades. And the data shows that that tends to have a very significant impact on the rate of social progress, particularly in mining-dependent countries. The other thing that those countries do is they tend to have not just good laws and regulations on paper, but they implement those laws and regulations consistently and effectively. And that would be an example of where perhaps there are lessons to be learned, where the gap between what is on paper and what is done in practice has held progress back. And there are several economies in sub-Saharan Africa that would fall into this criteria of where there are strong laws and policies, but they're not always implemented in practice. And as a result, we tend to have low rates of growth or suboptimal rates of growth of socioeconomic development. So I was describing how, under certain conditions, we have seen progress through the mining sector in countries around the world. And I said that governance is the key factor that determines progress. But what I want to be very clear on is that governance is not a one-way street. Governance is not just about governments. Governments have a very important role to play because they make the laws and regulations and they enforce them. But the founding belief and the core tenet of ICMM is that the industry and companies have a very important role to play as well. We as ICMM have for the last nearly 20 years been advocating, pushing for, and standing up for voluntary performance standards that in many cases go above and beyond the requirements of governments. I'll give you just one example. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Marseille in France for the IUCN Congress on Biodiversity. Now, many of you will be familiar with just how important the conversation about biodiversity and nature has been to the global sustainability conversation and in the mining sector. And at this Congress, we talked about what is it that governments need to do and what is it that industry needs to do in order to make sure that biodiversity is protected, not just for the benefit of industries that rely on biodiversity and nature and ecosystem services, but on societies whose lives are built around nature. And I was proud to say that since 2003, members of the ICMM, now back in 2002 when ICMM was established, it was only 6 mining companies. Today it's 28 mining companies. But since 2003, we have had a commitment to not mine or prospect in World Heritage Sites. And World Heritage Sites, of course, are some of the most important places for biodiversity on Earth. And it is a commitment that we hold very, very strongly, even though many governments have not made it a law or a regulation. Now, I use that as an example because that has meant that those sites have been protected from activities undertaken by companies that are part of the ICMM. And that is some of the world's largest mining companies. But in the absence of governments making it illegal to conduct not just mining, but any industrial activity in those sites, it has meant that even though members of the ICMM have stayed out of those sites, others have gone in and pursued development. And that is not a good outcome, not for those sites, not for the mining sector, not for the planet. And this is an example of how the industry has a responsibility to show leadership. And on this issue of World Heritage Sites, I'm proud that the industry showed leadership and has remained true to it. But at the same time, governments have a responsibility to take that leadership and make sure that that becomes the basis that everyone operates under. Because the reality and the fact is that the scale of the crises we face and the challenges facing our countries and communities are too large for any one company or any group of companies to fix alone. Frankly, they're too large often for any government to fix on its own too. Take the issue of climate change. No country, no matter whether they went to zero carbon tomorrow, would be able to single-handedly make a significant dent on the issue of climate change. It requires us all to work together. And I hope that the example I shared with you on World Heritage Sites gives a sense of where I believe we need to go and how we need to work together between the industry and governments to create almost a positive reinforcing cycle that ensures that the mining industry can be a powerful force for development, as, if you remember me saying, over the last 25 years, we have seen it can be under the right conditions in countries where the mining sector is an important economic actor. Let me conclude with a call to action. As I said, we as the ICMM make up about 1/3 of the global mining and metals industry across 650 sites in over 50 countries. We do not have all the answers at all on any issue. We have scale because across the 28, we have managed to capture such a large part of the industry. And I've seen the power of us being able to make an impact on these issues when we come together as this group of 28. But wouldn't it be wonderful? Wouldn't it be powerful if it wasn't just this group of 28? If we as a group of 28 joined other players, not just other mining companies, but other stakeholders in the mining industry to coordinate our activities and to speak with one voice on these issues. So my promise to you is that I will always be open to opportunities for collaboration with any of you who are working on issues that affect the sustainable development of our communities and the performance of the mining industry. And we do that by making all of ICMM's materials, our insights, our guidance, everything we have public and available to everybody. So if you aren't already using it, that is my offer to you to please engage with that and to please get in touch with us on ideas of how we can take these issues forward. And if there is an opportunity to work not just as this group of 28 companies, but with other mining companies to progress work such as on World Heritage sites or on social development or on climate change or on gender or on other aspects of diversity, that really now is the moment. This is the opportunity. Because what I hope I've shared with you today is the proof in clear fact about how, when the right conditions are in place, the mining industry can be a powerful force for social and economic development. And as we come out of this pandemic, we have said it so often, haven't we? We've said that we want to build back better. We have said that we don't want to make the mistakes of the past. Well, we are creating the economy of the future today. And that economy of the future will have mining, minerals, and metals absolutely at the heart of it, absolutely at the center of it, because, of course, the industry is the backbone for so much of the technology that will power our future economies and such a significant source of growth in countries around the world. That with this industry right at the center and with partnerships with government, I do think we can turn the bad news story, which is that we are well behind, to a good news story. So let me leave you with perhaps saying this might be our halftime talk in our football match. We are maybe 2 goals down, 3 goals down. Some of those are own goals, but we have the opportunity to turn it around in the second half. And we have the opportunity to come out on top if we manage to work together and if we take advantage of the powerful force for development that the mining industry can be. I thank you once again very much for the opportunity to share these views with you, and I look forward to engaging with you.